Hi, and welcome to the Learning Curve podcast. I'm your host, Jericia, and I am thrilled to have you join me on this journey of self-discovery and growth. In this first episode entitled My Way or the Highway, I'm diving into a topic that's been a significant learning curve for me, and that is rigidity in relationships. As I reflect on my own experiences, I realize that I can be really rigid in my expectation of others in relationships. And this rigidity oftentimes leads to conflicts and misunderstandings, and it makes it challenging to maintain healthy and fulfilling connections with others. So, today I'm going to explore the impact of being inflexible or rigid in relationships and why we might be rigid in the first place, and how we can show more flexibility and grace in our expectations of others, but also ourselves. So, I'm going to start by talking about the impact of rigidity in relationships. Do a little bit of quick psychology here, get that out of the way. So, when we're inflexible and we hold really tightly to our expectations, it can create a lot of tension and friction within a relationship. We might feel disappointed, frustrated, or even betrayed when we feel that others aren't meeting our standards or our expectations. So this can lead to conflicts and a breakdown in communication, as we are not really open to seeing things from other people's perspectives. So, one key aspect then of being able to navigate relationships is this idea of communication. Expecting others to read your mind or just intuitively know what your needs and expectations are can really set us up for disappointment and frustration. When we don't clearly communicate our thoughts and our feelings, we leave a lot of room for misunderstandings. It's really unfair to assume that other people are going to just know exactly what we want or need from them without us expressing it. Clear and honest communication can really help bridge this gap, and it can help to build stronger and more understanding relationships. For example, I have a really specific view of friendship and about what it should look like. I feel like people that I'm in a relationship with should be as transparent and as open as I am. So when I meet people and make connections with people who have some very clear boundaries set about what they are willing to share or not share, I can take that personally. It feels like a rejection or an abandonment, which really isn't fair to them because they're simply just setting boundaries to protect their own well-being in their space. So if you've listened to my previous podcast, Table for One, in my 8th episode, I shared my personal experience with depression. One of the struggles that I have when I'm experiencing a depressive episode is that I am not able to show up in my life as I would like. In my life, I'm the planner, I'm the initiator, I'm the people gatherer, I'm the caretaker. So it's such a depressing reality when I have to accept that I may not have the energy or the capacity to show up as I have been. And for me, that looks like making plans and then at the last minute canceling. I was really embarrassed about what I was experiencing with my depressive episodes. Also very annoyed. I also was annoyed when others didn't really seem to recognize, understand, or acknowledge that I had some limitations. But I have to ask myself, seriously, how would they know? How will they know? I'm really good at masking, hiding, covering when needed. So when I did show up in my spaces, my excuses related to why I hadn't been able to show up previously were things like life is lifing, or I have been so busy, or just the all-knowing girl. And then I quickly laugh it off, change the focus to the other person that I was talking with. That's a therapy 101 technique called deflection. But inside I was fuming because I felt like they're not noticing. They weren't asking me any questions about what was going on with me, why I wasn't showing up as I had been, if there was anything that they could do to help. I was walking around feeling very unseen, unheard, and unimportant. But why was I so rigid in the first place? Well, a fear of being vulnerable or being uncertain in life can lead me to cling very tightly to this sense of control that I think I have by having expectations and standards. And then couple that with past experiences that I have where when I've been vulnerable, people haven't shown up in the way that I wanted them to. Both of those things make me very wary about this idea of change, about this idea of being vulnerable. And it makes me a lot more rigid in my thinking. So it seems like I had an expectation that others would just be able to pick up on the fact that I was less than optimal. But through several experiences, I've learned that in order to have my expectation fulfilled, I have a part to play in that. I need to ask for what I want, which usually means that I need to share that I have a need. Talk about a learning curve. Admitting that I, the strong one, the capable one, the one who has it all together, needs help. I can't do it all 100% perfect all the time. I stayed stuck in that learning curve for quite some time, which was causing a lot of havoc, conflict, and dissatisfaction in my relationships. So why was I rigid in the first place? I think I feared being vulnerable or seeming like I was being uncertain or unsure. So that led me to cling even more tightly to what I knew or my expectations. And then you couple that with past experiences that I had when I was vulnerable and people didn't respond or show up in the way that I felt like they should. I think those things were factors that kept me being very wary of changing, being more vulnerable with others, and it made me way more rigid in my thinking. So discussing this whole idea of comfort with vulnerability is crucial, especially when you're considered the strong one. For many Black women like myself, there is immense cultural pressure to be the strong one, the reliable one, the doer, and the caretaker for those in our lives. And this societal expectation, according to an article from the American Psychological Association, there's this idea of the strong Black woman schema. And this can lead to significant as we strive to live up to these expectations. Being perceived as vulnerable can sometimes feel like a weakness, and it clashes with this ingrained belief that I always have to be resilient and self-sufficient. When I finally realized that I couldn't do it all and that I needed help, and my vulnerability started to sneak out, it felt devastating when it wasn't acknowledged and recognized. There's another article in Psychology Today that discusses how past experiences of perceived rejection or dismissal when showing vulnerability can make someone hesitant to reveal their true feelings again. That makes sense. This doesn't mean that the desire for others to acknowledge our struggles goes away. It just makes us more guarded and cautious. The hurt from not being seen or heard in these vulnerable moments can linger and make it even harder to open up in the future. So now you kind of get a little bit of perspective and context of where I am and the experiences that have kind of shaped some of these expectations that I have about relationships. But let's talk about how I can get out of this. How can I make myself more flexible? How can I be less rigid and begin to develop some of these fulfilling relationships that I desire? Here's a couple actionable steps that can really help navigate this learning curve of rigidity. First off, empathy. Learn how to implement empathy into your life, into your relationships, into how you interact and move through the world. Trying to understand where other people come from is a really valuable skill. Putting yourself in other people's shoes and considering their experiences, their needs, their boundaries, this really helps in seeing things from a different perspective than your own and being more accepting of the fact that people do interact differently. Be open to change. Recognize that change is a natural part of life and relationships. Embrace the idea that people are going to grow and evolve, and so should our expectations. It's not fair that my expectations stay here while individuals are growing and evolving and becoming different people and going through their own journeys that will incorporate them making changes in how they interact with others who interact differently. Be open to change. Recognize that change is a natural part of life and relationships. Embrace the idea that people are going to grow and evolve, and so should our expectations. It's not fair that my expectations stay here while individuals are growing and evolving and becoming different people and going through their own journeys that in how they interact with others. Being flexible, effective than your own, and being more accepting of the fact that people do interact differently. Be open to change. Recognize that change is a natural part of life and relationship. Embrace the idea that people are going to grow, and so should our expectations. It's not fair that my expectations, while individuals are growing and evolving and becoming different people and going through their own journeys, that will incorporate them making changes in how they interact with others. Being flexible is going to allow us to adapt to these changes without feeling threatened. Communication. Communicate clearly. Have open and honest conversations about expectations and listen to what other people need too. Clear communication endings and help both people feel heard and respected. Reflect on what your triggers are. Take time to understand why certain behaviors or boundaries trigger you. This self-reflection can help you address any underlying issues and approach situations with a lot more grace and understanding. As I went through this self-reflection, I realized that being questioned is a trigger for me. So when I was having difficult showing up in spaces and I needed to cancel or I needed to say no, or I needed to I needed to tell someone I didn't have the capacity to be what they needed me to be or show up as they needed me to. The trigger for me is when individuals would question that, or if they would turn it around and make it about them versus attending to me or showing interest in me as a human, as a person with struggles, as a friend. And so when I got triggered, as most of us do, my defenses came out. And that's when they got a very strict, they got a very abrupt version of me. They got a very defensive version of me, or they got cut off. So recognizing that that was my trigger, the learning curve for me was to be able to sit with that and recognize, Jericia, you're being triggered. This is about you, not necessarily about them. And you need to regulate yourself. So if that means that you need to take a break from this conversation and revisit this at another time, do so. And finally, you need to set some realistic expectations. I have realized over time that my expectations of others can be unrealistic at times. And so I need to adjust my expectations so that they are realistic and actually attainable. Can't have an expectation that nobody can ever reach. So understanding that everybody has their own pace and way of doing things, but when I set realistic expectations, it reduces the chances that I'm going to be disappointed or frustrated.